The FBI raid vehicles came screaming down my dirt driveway at 6 a.m., red and blue lights cutting through the morning fog like strobes from hell. 8 agents in tactical gear surrounded my ranch house while I stood on my front porch in boxer shorts and a t-shirt, watching my entire life get turned upside down. Agent Rodriguez flashed his badge and a search warrant. "Mr. Sullivan, we have credible reports of illegal firearms manufacturing, drug cultivation, and possible terrorism activities on this property." I stared at the warrant, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. At the bottom of the complaint section, I saw the signature I'd been expecting: Linda Pemberton, HOA President, Meadowbrook Estates. What Linda didn't know was that my cousin Emma had been watching the sunrise from her chambers at the Federal District Court downtown, preparing for another day of sending people like Linda to federal prison. And in about 4 hours, Linda was going to learn that falsely reporting federal crimes isn't just a felony. It's a career-ending, life-destroying mistake that would make her wish she'd never heard of Meadowbrook Estates. My name is David Sullivan, and I'd been living peacefully on my 40-acre ranch outside Meadowbrook for 3 years before Linda Pemberton decided I was her personal enemy. The ranch sat just outside the HOA boundaries, technically not subject to their rules, but close enough that Linda could see my property from her back deck. That proximity would become the source of everything that followed. I'd bought the ranch after retiring early from my software engineering career, looking for peace and space to raise a few cattle and horses. The property came with an old barn, a modest house, and enough land to finally live the quiet life I'd dreamed about during 20 years of corporate stress. The trouble started when Linda moved into the house next to the property line. She appeared at my gate exactly 1 week after her moving trucks left, wearing a crisp white blouse and carrying a folder thick with documents. Even then, I could see the calculating look in her eyes as she surveyed my ranch. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Linda Pemberton, your new neighbor and the president of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA." Her voice carried the kind of authority people use when they're used to being obeyed. "We need to discuss some concerns about your operations here." "My operations?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The farming activities, livestock, and whatever you're building in that barn." She gestured toward my workshop, where I'd been restoring a classic truck. "These activities are affecting our property values and community standards." "Ma'am, I'm not part of your HOA. This ranch predates your development by 40 years. Linda's smile tightened. "Perhaps not legally, but you're certainly affecting our community. We need to find a way to minimize the impact." That should have been my first warning about what kind of neighbor I was dealing with. For the first few months, Linda's harassment was subtle. Complaints to the county about suspicious activities on my ranch. Anonymous tips to animal control about neglected livestock, even though my horses were healthy and well cared for. Reports to the fire department about illegal burning when I had perfectly legal brush fires. Each investigation found nothing wrong, but the constant interruptions were wearing me down. I couldn't work on my truck without some official showing up with clipboard in hand, following up on another anonymous complaint. The pattern was always the same. Official arrives, investigates, finds nothing wrong, apologizes for bothering me. Then, a few days later, Linda would appear at my gate with a new solution to our mutual problem. "David," she'd say, using my first name like we were friends, "all these investigations could disappear if you'd just work with me. Maybe install some privacy screening so your activities aren't so visible from our community." "What activities?" "I'm rebuilding a truck engine and feeding horses." "You know what I mean." The thing was, I didn't know what she meant. But I was starting to understand that Linda had decided my ranch was somehow a threat to her perfect suburban kingdom, and she wouldn't stop until she'd found a way to eliminate that threat. The escalation began when I started my garden. Spring brought my decision to grow vegetables on a half-acre plot behind my barn. Nothing commercial, just tomatoes, peppers, and corn for my own use. But to Linda, it might as well have been a marijuana plantation. "That's not a garden, that's a farm," she screamed at me across the fence line one morning, pointing at my neat rows of seedlings. "You're running an agricultural operation in a residential area? It's vegetables, Linda. For eating. I know what you're really growing back there." The accusation hit me like a slap. She was actually suggesting I was growing drugs. Within a week, the county agricultural inspector was at my door. Then the DEA agricultural specialist. Both found exactly what they expected: tomatoes, peppers, and corn. But Linda wasn't deterred. "Those are just cover crops," she told anyone who'd listen at the Meadowbrook community meetings. "He's hiding the real operation somewhere else on that property." The paranoia was spreading through her HOA like a virus. Residents started driving by my ranch slowly, taking pictures. Some even parked across the road with binoculars, monitoring my suspicious vegetable growing activities. But Linda was just getting started. She'd found her angle of attack, and she was going to push it until something broke. That something turned out to be my workshop. I'd been working on restoring a 1967 Mustang in my barn for 2 years. It was my retirement hobby: stripping paint, rebuilding the engine, welding body panels back to perfection. The kind of therapeutic work that helped me unwind from decades of debugging code. But to Linda, the sounds of metalworking and engine testing meant something entirely different. "He's manufacturing weapons in that barn," she announced at the next HOA meeting. "I hear grinding, welding, and engines running at all hours. What legitimate business operates like that?" Of course, I wasn't running a business at all. But Linda had a talent for turning innocent activities into sinister conspiracies. The complaints escalated. Now I was allegedly running an unlicensed manufacturing operation. My classic car restoration was suddenly industrial activities in a residential zone. The fact that I ordered parts online became suspicious package deliveries, indicating illegal commerce. County inspectors started showing up monthly instead of occasionally. Each time they found nothing but a guy working on old cars. But each time, Linda pushed harder. "They're not looking in the right places," she'd insist. "He's hiding the real operation. Why else would someone move to the middle of nowhere and make all that noise?" The truth was simple: I'd moved to the middle of nowhere for the peace and quiet. But Linda's version made better story. Then she found her smoking gun. I'd been buying steel plates online to fabricate custom parts for my truck restoration. Nothing unusual, just raw metal for bodywork and frame repairs. But when Linda saw the delivery truck dropping off steel shipments, her imagination went into overdrive. "Armor plating?" she declared to anyone who'd listen. "He's building armored vehicles. Why else would someone need that much steel?" The complaints to law enforcement shifted from nuisance reports to terror alerts. Linda was now telling authorities I was potentially building vehicle bombs or improvised military equipment. FBI agent Rodriguez showed up that Thursday afternoon, polite but serious. "Mr. Sullivan, we've received some concerns about activities on your property. Mind if I take a look around?" I showed him everything: the Mustang in progress, the steel plates waiting to become floor pans, the completely normal workshop of someone restoring classic cars. He seemed satisfied and apologetic for the intrusion. "Just have to follow up on reports," he said, handing me his card. "Though between you and me, this looks like a neighbor dispute that got out of hand." He was right, but Linda wasn't finished escalating. 2 weeks later, she made the call that would destroy her life and vindicate mine completely. I was feeding my horses when I heard the helicopters. Not unusual in rural areas, except these were flying low and in formation. Military precision. Then I saw the convoy of black SUVs racing down my dirt road, dust clouds billowing behind them like smoke from an explosion. My stomach dropped as I realized they were heading for my ranch. The FBI tactical team was already deploying when I reached my front porch. Agent Rodriguez was there, but his apologetic demeanor was gone, replaced by the stone-faced professionalism of someone executing a federal warrant. "Mr. Sullivan, we have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of illegal weapons manufacturing, drug cultivation, and materials related to domestic terrorism." The words hit me like physical blows. Terrorism. Linda had actually accused me of terrorism. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. But Rodriguez was already directing his team toward my barn, my house, my workshop, where I'd spent countless peaceful hours rebuilding engines. "We have credible reports of suspicious activities, unusual purchases of materials consistent with weapons manufacturing, and possible coordination with anti-government groups." Anti-government groups? I don't even vote regularly. But they weren't listening. 8 federal agents were tearing through my property, while news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting my humiliation to the world. Linda had finally found a way to destroy me. Or so she thought. The search lasted 6 hours. They photographed everything, confiscated my steel plates, took samples of my garden soil, and examined every vehicle on the property. They found exactly what Agent Rodriguez had found weeks earlier, a guy restoring classic cars and growing vegetables. "Mr. Sullivan," Rodriguez said as his team packed up, "I'm sorry about this." The reports we received were extremely detailed and specific. "Someone really wanted us to believe you were a threat." "Someone named Linda Pemberton?" His expression confirmed what I already knew. "I can't discuss the source, but I will say this filing false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime. If someone fabricated evidence or made deliberately false statements to initiate this investigation, they're looking at federal charges." After they left, I sat on my porch staring at the mess they'd left behind. My peaceful ranch looked like a crime scene, complete with evidence tape and disturbed earth where they'd searched for buried weapons. But Rodriguez's words echoed in my mind. Filing false reports was a federal crime. Linda had just committed a felony, and she'd done it with enough detail and malicious intent to constitute a federal case. Time to make a phone call I'd been avoiding for 3 years. My cousin Emma and I hadn't spoken since our grandmother's funeral. Not because of any falling out, but because our lives had gone in completely different directions. She'd become a federal judge, appointed to the district court at age 45 after a distinguished career as a prosecutor. I'd become a software engineer who just wanted to fix old trucks in peace. But family is family, and Emma had always been the kind of person didn't tolerate bullies. "David," her voice was surprised when she answered my call. "Is everything okay?" "Emma, I need advice. Someone just called the FBI on me with false terrorism reports, and I think I need to understand my options." The pause was long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "David, did you just say someone filed false terrorism reports against you with the FBI?" "That's exactly what I said. Tell me everything." And I mean everything. I spent an hour detailing Linda's 3-year harassment campaign, the escalating false reports, and the morning's FBI raid. Emma listened without interruption, and I could practically hear her prosecutor instincts engaging. "David, this isn't just harassment. This is a pattern of federal crimes. False reporting, abuse of federal resources, possibly conspiracy to deprive you of civil rights under federal law." "What does that mean?" "It means your neighbor just committed crimes that fall under my jurisdiction. And if the evidence supports what you're telling me, she's going to federal prison." Emma explained the process with the cold precision of someone who'd sent dozens of people to federal prison for similar crimes. False reporting to federal agencies wasn't just a misdemeanor when done with malicious intent and involving terrorism allegations. It became a felony with potential 10-year sentences. The FBI will investigate the source of the reports, she explained. If they find evidence of deliberate fabrication, the U.S. attorney will file charges. Your neighbor made this a federal case the moment she involved federal agents. What do I need to do? Document everything. Every harassment incident, every false report, every interaction. The federal prosecutors will need to prove pattern and intent. Emma, I don't want revenge. I just want her to leave me alone. David, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. When someone weaponizes federal law enforcement against an innocent person, they've committed crimes against the entire system of justice. She chose to escalate this to federal level. And if she's convicted, federal prison, significant fines, and a felony record that will destroy her career and reputation. Plus, you'll have grounds for a massive civil lawsuit for damages, emotional distress, and violation of your civil rights. For the first time in 3 years, I felt hope instead of dread. Linda had pushed this fight into federal court, where my cousin happened to wear the robes. The FBI investigation moved quickly once Agent Rodriguez realized he'd been manipulated. Within a week, they'd obtained Linda's phone records, email communications, and HOA meeting minutes, where she'd discussed her campaign against me. The evidence was damning. Linda had been coordinating with other HOA members to file multiple false reports from different sources, making her accusations appear credible. She'd researched federal crime definitions online to craft reports that would trigger maximum law enforcement response. She'd even staged photos to make my normal ranch activities look suspicious. Mr. Sullivan, Rodriguez called to update me, we're forwarding this case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution. What your neighbor did goes well beyond harassment. This is organized fraud against federal agencies. How serious are the charges? Very serious. She's looking at multiple felonies, including false reporting of terrorism, conspiracy to file false reports, and civil rights violations. If convicted, she's looking at 8 to 12 years in federal prison. The irony was perfect. Linda had tried to have me arrested as a terrorist, and instead had turned herself into a federal criminal. But the best part was still coming. The federal grand jury indicted Linda Pemberton on 6 felony counts 3 weeks after the raid on my ranch. The charges read like a prosecutor's dream: false reporting of terrorism activities, conspiracy to file false federal reports, abuse of federal resources, civil rights violations under federal law, and wire fraud for using electronic communications to coordinate her scheme. The local news picked up the story immediately. HOA, president indicted for false FBI reports against neighbor. Within days, it was national news. Linda became the face of HOA abuse, the poster child for what happens when petty neighborhood disputes escalate to federal crimes. But the most satisfying moment came when Linda's high-powered attorney requested Judge Emma Sullivan to recuse herself from the case due to potential conflict of interest. Emma's response, filed in open court, was a masterpiece of judicial writing. The defendant's counsel requests recusal based on familial relationship between this court and the victim. However, said relationship was unknown to the defendant when she chose to commit federal crimes against the victim. The defendant cannot manufacture conflicts of interest through her own criminal conduct. Motion denied. Linda had trapped herself perfectly. She'd committed federal crimes against a federal judge's family member, in that judge's jurisdiction, creating a case where recusal was impossible because she'd created the conflict herself. Emma would be presiding over Linda's federal trial, and Linda couldn't do anything about it. The plea negotiations were brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of trial before a judge she'd inadvertently wronged, Linda's attorney pushed hard for a deal. The Attorney wasn't interested in mercy. Your client orchestrated a 3-year harassment campaign culminating in false terrorism reports that wasted federal resources and traumatized an innocent citizen, Prosecutor James Mitchell explained in court. The government sees no reason for leniency. Linda's defense tried arguing that she genuinely believed I was dangerous, that her reports were made in good faith based on legitimate concerns. Emma destroyed that argument in 30 seconds. The evidence shows the defendant researched federal crime definitions to craft false reports designed to trigger maximum law enforcement response. She coordinated with co-conspirators to file multiple false reports from different sources. She staged photographs to misrepresent innocent activities as suspicious. This was not good faith reporting. This was a deliberate campaign of harassment, using federal agencies as weapons. The plea offer was simple. Plead guilty to 3 felony counts, serve 4 years in federal prison, pay $250,000 in fines and restitution, and surrender all rights to file any future complaints against me or my property. Linda refused. She wanted to go to trial. Big mistake. The federal trial was a public spectacle. Local news covered every day, broadcasting Linda's humiliation to the community that had once respected her as HOA president. The government's case was devastating. They presented evidence of Linda's 3-year harassment campaign, her coordination with other HOA members to file false reports, and her deliberate research into federal crime definitions to craft maximum impact false allegations. Email evidence showed Linda discussing how to get rid of the ranch problem permanently and her excitement when she realized terrorism reports would trigger FBI response. Phone records revealed her coaching other HOA members on what to report and when, creating the illusion of multiple independent sources confirming suspicious activities. Most damning of all were the staged photographs Linda had taken, showing normal ranch activities from misleading angles to make them appear suspicious, then submitting these fabricated evidence photos with her FBI reports. Her defense crumbled under cross-examination. Linda tried claiming she'd been genuinely concerned about community safety, but Prosecutor Mitchell systematically destroyed her credibility. Mrs. Pemberton, you testified that you were concerned about Mr. Sullivan's activities. But your emails show you were angry that his property affected your view from your deck, correct? I was concerned about property values. Mrs. Pemberton, yes or no, were you angry that you could see his ranch from your property? Yes, but... And you told other HOA members that you wanted to force him out of the area, correct? I may have said something like, yes or no, Mrs. Pemberton? Yes. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Linda collapsed in her chair as the jury foreman read the verdict. 6 felony convictions, each carrying potential prison time that would add up to life-changing consequences. Emma's sentencing was precise and merciless. The defendant orchestrated a campaign of harassment that escalated to false terrorism reports, wasting federal resources and traumatizing an innocent citizen. Her actions represent a serious abuse of our justice system and cannot be treated lightly. On count 1, false reporting of terrorism, 4 years federal prison. On count 2, conspiracy to file false reports, 3 years federal prison, concurrent. On count 3, civil rights violations, 2 years federal prison, concurrent. On count 4, abuse of federal resources, 18 months federal prison, concurrent. On count 5, wire fraud, 2 years federal prison, concurrent. On count 6, filing false federal reports, 3 years federal prison, concurrent. Total sentence, 4 years federal prison, $300,000 in fines, and $150,000 in restitution to Mr. Sullivan for damages and legal costs. Linda was led away in handcuffs, still screaming about conspiracies and corruption, while I sat in the gallery watching justice finally be served. But Emma wasn't finished. Additionally, Emma continued, this court is issuing a permanent federal restraining order prohibiting the defendant from any contact with Mr. Sullivan or his property. Upon release from federal prison, the defendant is permanently banned from residing within 5 miles of the victim's ranch. Furthermore, this court is forwarding recommendations to the state attorney general regarding potential criminal charges against co-conspirators who participated in filing false reports. Linda's HOA allies, who'd helped coordinate false reports, were about to discover that federal judges have long memories and broad authority. Finally, the court notes that this case represents a serious abuse of federal resources and public trust. The defendant's actions wasted thousands of hours of FBI time and cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigation costs. Such conduct strikes at the heart of our justice system and will not be tolerated. Emma's gavel came down with finality that echoed through the courtroom. Linda Pemberton, who'd tried to have me arrested as a terrorist, was now a convicted federal felon heading to federal prison. The woman who'd weaponized federal law enforcement against me had been destroyed by the very system she'd tried to abuse. The aftermath was swift and complete. Linda's conviction made national news, turning her into a cautionary tale about HOA abuse and the dangers of false reporting. Her house in Meadowbrook went into foreclosure as legal fees and fines consumed her finances. The HOA, faced with liability for enabling her harassment campaign, was dissolved and reformed under new leadership that wanted nothing to do with Linda's legacy. Several of her co-conspirators were indicted on federal charges for their role in filing false reports. 2 pled guilty and received probation and fines. 1 went to trial and received 18 months in federal prison. The message was clear: weaponizing federal law enforcement against innocent people had serious consequences. But my victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. For the first time in 3 years, I could work on my ranch without looking over my shoulder. No more surprise inspections, no more anonymous complaints, no more harassment from someone who'd decided my peaceful existence was somehow a threat to her suburban perfection. My garden grew without federal agents testing the soil. My workshop operated without investigators photographing my tools. My horses grazed without officials checking for signs of neglect. Peace had returned to my ranch, purchased with Linda's federal prison sentence. 6 months after Linda's sentencing, I was working on the Mustang when I heard a car door slam outside. My first instinct was the old panic, another official investigation, another harassment campaign. Instead, I found Emma standing by her car, wearing jeans instead of judicial robes, carrying a bottle of wine and looking more relaxed than I'd seen her since we were kids. "Thought I'd check on my favorite cousin," she said with a smile. "See how retirement's treating you. Better now that I don't have FBI raids as a morning routine." We sat on my porch, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, finally able to laugh about the insanity Linda had brought into our lives. "You know," Emma said in 20 years on the bench, "I've never seen someone work so hard to destroy themselves." She literally researched the exact crimes she was committing and then committed them against a federal judge's family member. Think she learned anything in federal prison? People like Linda don't learn. They blame everyone but themselves for the consequences of their choices. Any word on how she's adjusting to prison life? Emma's smile was sharp. Let's just say federal prison is less accommodating than HOA presidency. She's discovering what it's like when someone else controls every aspect of your daily life. The irony was perfect. Linda, who tried to control every detail of my life, was now living under complete federal control. A year later, the civil lawsuit settlement was finalized. Linda's insurance company, faced with overwhelming evidence of deliberate harassment and federal criminal convictions, settled for $1.2 million rather than face trial. The money was nice, but the real victory was the precedent. Emma's federal ruling became case law, establishing clear consequences for using false reports to weaponize federal law enforcement against innocent people. Legal experts called it the Pemberton precedent, a warning to anyone tempted to turn neighbor disputes into federal cases through false reporting. HOA abuse cases across the country began citing Sullivan v. Pemberton as evidence that harassment could escalate to federal crimes with life-destroying consequences. Linda had become a cautionary tale taught in law schools and HOA management courses. But the most satisfying consequence was simpler than legal precedent or monetary damages. These days, my ranch is exactly what I dreamed when I bought it, a peaceful place to work on classic cars, grow vegetables, and raise horses without interference. The new Meadowbrook HOA leadership has been apologetic and respectful, understanding that their predecessors' actions created liability they're still managing. They've implemented policies specifically prohibiting harassment of non-members and requiring verification before filing any official complaints. My nearest neighbors are a young couple who wave when they drive by and sometimes stop to admire the Mustang's restoration progress. They know the story, of course. Everyone in the county knows about Linda Pemberton's federal conviction, but they're more interested in talking about cars than rehashing old drama. The ranch has become something of a local attraction. Car enthusiasts stop by to see my restoration work. Federal law enforcement uses the case for training on false report investigations, and journalism students interview me about the dangers of HOA abuse. I've become an accidental expert on fighting back against harassment, though my advice is always the same: document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to use the system when bullies try to abuse it. Linda was released from federal prison after serving 3.5 years of her 4-year sentence. Emma's restraining order remains in effect, so she can't live within 5 miles of my ranch, but word is she moved to another state entirely. I heard through local gossip that she's working in a call center somewhere, a convicted felon whose HOA president days are permanently behind her. No one will elect someone with federal convictions to any position of authority. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about the choices that led her from suburban HOA president to federal prisoner. If she realizes that her 3-year harassment campaign ultimately destroyed her own life while barely affecting mine. But mostly, I don't think about Linda Pemberton at all. I think about the sound of my restored Mustang's engine purring to life. The satisfaction of tomatoes growing in soil that's never again been tested for drugs. The peace of horses grazing in pastures that no longer attract federal investigations. Linda tried to use the FBI to destroy my quiet life. Instead, she used federal crimes to destroy her own loud one. Last week, a new HOA president from a development 20 miles away called to introduce herself and discuss community cooperation. I listened politely as she explained how developments and nearby properties could work together for mutual benefit. Of course, she said carefully, we've all learned from the Pemberton situation. No one wants to repeat those mistakes. I appreciate that, I replied. Linda Pemberton made some very poor choices. Indeed, we've implemented policies to prevent any similar issues. Full documentation requirements for any complaints, verification procedures, and legal review before contacting authorities. Sounds reasonable. We hope we can be good neighbors, Mr. Sullivan. Your ranch is beautiful, and we have no intention of interfering with your peaceful enjoyment of it. It was exactly what Linda should have said 3 years ago, instead of declaring war on someone whose only crime was living peacefully next to her development. But Linda had chosen harassment over cooperation, federal crimes over common sense, and ultimately federal prison over federal citizenship. Her choices, her consequences. My ranch remains peaceful. My cousin Emma remains a federal judge, And Linda Pemberton remains a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA power goes to someone's head. Sometimes, justice takes time, but when it arrives, it's absolutely perfect. The woman who called the FBI on my ranch learned that my cousin wears the robes in federal court. And that made all the difference.